try and do that. And then at hatching time, you saturate. I mean, the air is saturated with humidity, and you watch the adults, they don't do a thing. You think, well, the female, if there's that much humidity, she must go take a bath and come soaking wet and plunk herself on the eggs. Nope, no difference at all. And they will have a better hatchability. We can't duplicate it. And these are adult prairie falcons. That's actually Helen Treffry that's holding them. I had trapped, I'm not even sure if it's the same one or not, but I had trapped them and for them, and we're putting satellite transmitters on them. There, a couple of years ago, I recognized the hands there in the flip-flops. That's the young peregrine, and that's me, the young peregrine, probably in the 80s, I think, because that's when I had that coat. And that's our barn from the outside, what we've got there. And we're just processing them. There's me with a little bit more hair than what I've got now. I think nature gets back at you. I mean, look at me now. So, but it was very good because the insects are terrible up there. I've got a young gerfalcon there. That's the first one that I found. This is on the Horton River. That's the young peregrine that I'm banding. Actually, that's a slide that's flipped the wrong way because my watch is on the wrong hand. So, but it's a young peregrine that I'm banding, and as I say, it was kind of neat to have that jur. We were actually looking for peregrines, but the jurs were a little bit late that year. They're an Arctic species, and that's very typical of what they look like. I was at that time, I went down and where I was asked, it's the sort of thing I pay to do, but the Canadian Wildlife Service needed somebody in short notice to survey the proposed route for the Mackenzie Valley pipeline. And so they said, Richard, it was again working for Rich. He said, I need somebody right away. Would you mind doing it? Well, yeah, twist my arm, force me. It was just great. And we're on this one on the right, we're on the Horton River. We're only the second group to do it again. That was 73. That was actually the same year that Dad bred his peregrines. So Richard was telling me about it, and I couldn't see them until I got back. So it was quite interesting. And Keith here, who's on the right, had made a bet that we would breed peregrines, that the Canadian government, I think, would breed peregrines. And the question of whether he could collect his bet or not, and he said, no, Dad's not part of the Canadian government. So he lost out on the bet, so it's kind of funny. And there we are there. We ran out of fuel. Actually, we ran out of food, too. We had to shoot a caribou. We were actually trying to get them because they were so close to the boat, tried to jump on one. But well, so we've got a sail rigged up and do that. And I believe that picture is in the Return of the Peregrine, but I didn't get my name on it. But it does mention the Horton River anyway. So it was an incredibly beautiful river, particularly this part on the right, the canyon. It was just one of those ones you couldn't believe you're out in the middle of several hundred kilometers from the nearest person. It was just absolutely gorgeous. I'd love to do the trip again. And this is kind of typical. The one on the left there is prairie falcons and sort of what they do out on the prairies where they nest on in that. This one on the right, the picture is taken by Dr. Gordon Court, who's the chief raptor biologist for the province. And that's an artificial site that I put in. That's the original hack site that Dad's birds were hacked out of. I put that in. It's now slumped out, and I had to build another one for them. And there's a little bit unusual. The male is feeding the young and the female's up there. Usually the females do it, but in this case, that's what they're doing. Now, when I went up north and was working for the Canadian Wildlife Service, even though I'd done lots of banding and stuff and gone with Dad and a little bit with Richard and done that, and I had the experience, that really started me out in doing what I do. And I should mention, although sometimes I get a few dollars, it's pretty well all volunteer work that I do. I just do it to help out. In that case, they did pay me when I went up north, but so this is what I'm doing. This is actually, I do surveying and banding. We talk, and usually we say banding, but the real important part of it is the surveying. How many nesting pair are they? How many are producing? How many are producing? How many young? And so this is an artificial site, that last one that I was at, and that was part of the pine coulee mitigation work. The law in Alberta now is if you're going to do a project like that and destroy habitat, there has to be no net loss. So you have to build extra ones, and so that was one I built. And it's quite interesting. It looks like the back of your hand, and being a rancher working with cattle, it's called Boneyard Coulee, and I GPSed it. And as I say, it's interesting because you can see they get the buffalo up, they've got nowhere to go. It's 450 feet, 167 meters. You think about that, they were putting maybe 100 to 1,000 head of buffalo over that. And it's a deep coulee, they probably did either side. It must have been amazing to watch. This is the site here, so you can see me, I'm looking, setting up, and I'm going down and doing it. And that is this site here. And these pictures here, with the exception of the last one, they're all taken by Ken Krebin, who's in the back there. He won a National Geographic photography contest, and he's come out with me. So if you want to know anything about photography, Ken's the person to ask. He's done a great job. And actually, we haven't been very fair with these ones here because these have been copied and printed out, and so they've kind of knocked up his coloring a little bit. So he does do a better job than that. But anyway, that's me banding. That's another site, again, in the Pine Coulee area. This is actually on an old eagle nest, and two different ones. These are all different. This one's in the Pine Coulee proper, and that's actually very close to that last site we've got there. Just me holding a young one with my goofy hat and old coat that I was known for, but both of those are retired now. And there's another one with a female prairie with some chicks there, and that's a stick nest, maybe an old fruginous nest. I don't think that's an eagle nest there. And that's something interesting. I mentioned satellite transmitters before. We're putting them on the birds, so that's what they look like. That allows us to track the birds for up to 2 years now. It doesn't seem to encumber them. They can breed. In fact, this female was actually breeding, so she was able to mate and have lay eggs and do quite well. And we're learning all kinds of things that we never knew, where they go to hunt, how they hunt, and things like that. And I don't do it myself. I just go and help the biologists. They usually say, "John, can you come come help me trap birds?" So I trap the birds and we put them on. And we're doing it now. I'm working down particularly with the windmills and things like that because they're building them near some of the sites, and that has some concern, and I'm going to mention that a bit later. The other thing I do is I build artificial sites. So I mentioned no net loss. So there I am with a hammer drill. I actually have the hammer drill right here doing it. And actually, it's surprisingly, it's quite hard to do when you're dangling from the rope like that. The hammer drills, you have to have enough pressure for them to hammer. And when you're on a rope like that, it pushes you off. And sometimes you're spinning around and things. And that was a few years ago when I really liked that picture. That's one that I free climbed. And just a crack there. So I've got my foot jammed in and I jammed my elbow in and I could kind of move my hand like that. And it must have taken me about 15 or 20 minutes to do it. And then it got really interesting because I found that my arm and my leg were asleep. Try coming down to that is really tricky climbing. Even now that I look at it and I wonder, how did I do it? But that was when I was young and a little bit more foolish. So now I use a rope on that one, and that's still producing some young. There's another artificial site. So you saw in the first picture on the left there before that I was digging it in. We do that. Or if we take something which is like the last one or like this was just a shelf with nothing on it. The birds need dirt in order to build a scrape. And there's my son Tim on my shoulders, and he's got my hat because that's all we had to put dirt in. And what we do is we put the rocks up here to keep the dirt in under a little bit of an overhang. This white, what we call whitewash, which is their newts or their excrement, draws them in. It's obviously been a perch. We put that. So Tim's actually quite a big boy, even though he wasn't full grown then. So he's on my shoulder, and I don't have my hat, and the reason I wear a floppy hat, I've got this new one that I call my Indiana Jones, except I say Alberta Campbell, but doesn't have quite the same ring. I wear that. I'm quite pleased. But anyway, he's pushing dirt down. I'm going, hurry up, Tim, this is getting heavy. And he's going, oh, just one more. Here, Emily. And he throws it down to his sister to fill up. And I'm holding on. But as you can see, it was worth it because they did produce young in it. And there's me. Actually, this one's just about my black diamond there that my nephew and I put in. And he happened to get this interesting picture. I'm not quite sure how because he was above me. But he did that anyway, and putting in an artificial site, that hasn't had anything in there, but it was relatively easy to produce. And I do use a rope occasionally too if I have to, so there you can see. In there, and Rich, you'll appreciate this one. I actually call this one Rich's site. This is Rich here in the front row, and here he's putting in, and it's a beautiful site that we've got. I think one of the nicest in terms of security. It's right in the rock. We had an awful time. Rich did most of the work doing it, so I thought only fair. And that's my brother Neil on another site that's down by Pine Coulee. It was suggested we put one in there, so we did, but it's marginal. It's too low, facing the wrong way. It's never had anything in it. What I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the ecology and I guess my perspective of the birds and sort of how they're doing. In 2010, I went down and back up the Mackenzie River, which is the second longest river in North America. And we went from Hay River to Inuvik and then back to upriver to Wrigley, which is about 3,000 kilometers on the water in just over a month. We were surveying peregrine falcons actually with Keith, who was in the Horton River. That was the last time I'd gone out with him. It's his trip, and he asked me to come along. We were surveying peregrine falcons, nesting peregrine falcons on the Mackenzie River for the territory government. And when I did it in '73 as part of the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline survey, I think I had 9 pair on there. This year we had 78, and I'm sure there are over 100 that nest on there to give you an idea of how the birds have come back. Now that's in the north. And the interesting thing about that is you get to see what a healthy population is like. With a healthy population, you have every site occupied. There are different qualities of sites, and they're not all successful, but they're all occupied. And when you're trapping adults and doing things as we are, or as we have been doing, sometimes with those sites, if you trap a male, for example, you can get up to 4 or 5 males fighting for his position. So those are what we call floaters. Those are young birds, they're old birds, they're birds that weren't in top peak condition. And it's interesting, possession does seem to be 9/10 of the law because you can do that, have that fighting and get a male established and keep the male overnight. And when you release him again, he gets his territory back nearly every time. And the point being, these birds, because they're predators and they're hunters, they probably have about 3 days, 3 or 4 days. If they don't make a kill and eat, they're dead, they starve. So the quality of the birds, I'll use a sports analogy, is kind of like the NHL. In order to be good enough to live, you have to be NHL caliber. All the bottom end, they starve out. Probably in the sites that we've got down here around with us, if they're producing on average 1 or 2 young a year that survive, they're doing really well. In fact, they may even be doing with prairie falcons, producing a young every other year, given what we've got. Now, the other thing, what I've got here is the quality of the sites, and a site isn't a site isn't a site. This site here, and you can see the young birds. So these birds about yay high. That's all excrement. And there was a big rock that was in here, so I did go in there and dig in, and this is the same thing, excrement. It's about this site. These are 2 different sites. That's another one on the Bow River that's been there for a long time. That top site there, the analysis came back carbon dating 1680. So that's obviously a site that's a tier 1 site. And a tier 1 site is a site that produces no one site will produce every year because things happen. You get a storm, knock them out. Sometimes you get something, the horned owls will come in, as the top site had this year. Bad weather, adult gets killed, and they can't produce. But generally, a tier 1 site will produce for prairie falcons. They produce 5 young. It'll produce 4.5 to 5 young, maybe 19 years out of 20. You have a tier 2 site, and it will produce maybe 8 or 9 years out of 10, and 3 to 3.5 young. And so over that 20-year period, say that first rate of failure, you get half as many young from the tier 2 site. And a tier 1 site down here is a marginal site that isn't occupied very often. It might go 15, 20 years or more. I've had sites go over 40 years. I've got one now that's been used consistently the last 8 or 10 years, and it wasn't used for 40 years. It was a teenager last time it was used. So the quality of the sites matter. And what you do is birds will go up in quality. So you might get a young pair that'll set up on a marginal site and try it, and then there's an opening and they'll move up and go through the sites. And what I'm seeing down here with prairie falcons and peregrine falcons, not every site is occupied. And it's that floater population that is really important, because that's your excess. So if you have lots of sites like on the Mackenzie, if you take out 4 or 5 sites, it's not going to make any difference. If you have a freak storm come through and wipe out a population, a production for that year, because it's a robust population, they can survive that, no problem. If you've got what we've got down here, what I'm seeing, people saying, well, the prairies aren't too bad, they're in here. Well, no, you don't have a robust population. You have virtually no competition for sites at all. You don't have every site occupied, and quite often you'll have 3 or 4 sites, or I've got some places 5 to 7 sites, and you only get 1 pair nesting there. So clearly it's not a healthy population. Now, what you've got where I mentioned the competition, the floater population, because you've got all that competition with the birds, the poor, the not very good ones, the still NHL quality, and the top-notch ones, there's not a lot of difference between them. But the ones that get to produce have to be the stars because of the competition. Well, if you don't have that down here, then the sites become more important, because if you've got a good site that has lots of prey that's secure, as in these sites here, then if you get birds in them, you want to keep the integrity of that site. It's almost the site's more important than the birds, because the birds, I mean, if you've got a choice, you go to the best site. Why wouldn't you? So you want to keep that. And what I'm seeing, that Nexon site that I mentioned there, in the last couple of years is only one of 2 sites in Calgary that are producing. And they're taking that stack down, so they eliminated that site. And that's a tier 1 site, clearly. That female that you saw at the start of the video there came from that site, as did another one for the University of Calgary, that one was, and there's another one at U of A that went nested there. Both of them were sisters. The U of A one was interesting because they had an adult female on that site, and they had a satellite transmitter, and they had the young female move in. And the biologists were watching because they knew when the old female was coming in. She came in, landed in the nest box, and the young female went in, and the fight was on, and they went at it hard. And they will actually fight to the death, because if you're, if that's what it takes and you want to reproduce, and it's all about reproducing, you put it all in line. So they were fighting so hard that the biologists were watching from across the street in the building there. One of the guys gumboots it down across the street, grabs the building manager, "Get me out there now!" And he comes up and grabs both birds. And they figured the young female won. And so they kept the old female, released her out of town. She came back and fought with the young female, but she lost. And that young female produced the next year, same thing, but this time it was much, much closer. But they figured the young female won, but she got really badly beaten up. Next day, another female came in and killed her. That's the way it is with nature. And it's just bad luck. And I think more and more I see with nature, it's all about luck. whether you live, and if you have bad luck, you die early. Nature, it's all about numbers. Individuals are not really all that important. It's just a whole bunch of numbers, and some will survive and some won't. So my point about the sites there is, like that Nexon site, there's a tier 1 site that they've eliminated. And the interesting thing is they were just going to start tearing it down. There were ravens that went into the box there. And so they didn't think the peregrines were there, and then they realized they were. So they backed off, and then they eliminated the site. Well, it doesn't matter this year or last year. If you're going to eliminate the site, it's the important thing is eliminating the site. And the other thing I'll say is about development and what I've seen. And Heidi, I guess you're big on windmills here, so you may not appreciate this, but I'm going to be a bit critical of how they're doing. I was down in your country, and tier 1 site, and in fact the biologists were looking at it, and we've gone back, I think he went back 38 years, and we can only record 1 year that they weren't successful. And what I saw was development that was windmills were put up very close to the site. They were putting in a substation, which you don't need. Windmills you need because of the profile. It's kind of like water where the most is. Yeah, I can understand that. They were doing it in the middle of the breeding season, particularly around hatching, which is a critical time. I have no idea why they were allowed to do that. And the substation you don't need. And the rule of thumb that we have, or the rule of thumb, the guideline is 1,000 meters, which is a kilometer away from the site, and it's a radius. But if you look at the birds and study them, you'll find generally they go in one direction to hunt. So the radius part of it doesn't really follow. 1,000 meters upwind, because generally they go in downwind, but they'll go wherever the prey is. Doesn't matter. You might be able to put 400 meters from the site. If you build it out of the breeding season, it may not matter. You might go 1,500, 2 kilometers downstream, and you put up 5 windmills. The birds are aerial. It's like blocking their corridor. It makes a difference. Windmills are different than a well site, for example, and there's no hard and set rules, and I have no idea why they were allowing them to put in that wind farm that close to that site at that time of the year. And they may have been within 1,000 meters. In my opinion, it's inaccurate. It's not good enough, I guess I'll say. If you've got a species like prairie falcons that are on the watch list, or peregrine falcons at this site that are considered threatened and they were endangered, then you should have specific criteria for that species. And I would suggest that part of the criteria would watch the site, see where they're hunting and going, and then take that if you're going to put in something like windmills, a windmill is different than a well site. If you're going to put up windmills, don't put it in the corridor. If you like to put it in there, let's leave them a gap that they can hunt around. And we've got a couple of sites down there, and they're going to ring it. It's going to be an island, 1,000 meters, and it's all going to be windmills. Well, these birds are aerial. How do you expect them to do it? And with that site that I mentioned, with the windmills that they were putting up, they taking forever to put them up too, in the middle of the breeding season. They'll go and, if they hear the criticism, they'll go back and they'll say, well, the birds are still there. What's your problem? Didn't bother them. Well, you might have taken that site from a tier 1 site and now made it a tier 2 site. So you make it harder for them to hunt, harder for them to raise young. They probably raise less young, fewer young over it. So you've changed the quality of the site. If you don't have very many birds, you want to keep those tier 1 sites that can produce lots of young, because they'll produce lots of young, they'll be healthy, vigorous, they're more likely to come up and survive and become breeding adults, and that's what you want. And I think we need to be doing more in that regard. And as I say, this site was taken out. That's only 2 active sites in the last 2 years in the city of Calgary. So you just wiped out 50% of the nesting population. That makes a difference. And, there are things that you can do. Now I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'm going to throw this in food for thought in the perspective and kind of in line with what I'm saying. And this isn't a criticism of biologists. Biologists are actually very dedicated people, some of the most dedicated I know. It's just a question of, and not so much a critique of them and what they know, it's more that what we know as a species. In 2013, they discovered a large mammal migration in Wyoming. It is actually the longest mammal migration in the southern U.S. And it's mule deer. They were studying mule deer in the deserts in southern Wyoming, and they started putting radio collars on them, and they found they were migrating up to the mountains in the north, 150 miles, which is 240 kilometers. We're talking hundreds of animals that are doing it. Some of them, they're going through fencing like this, and there's just a hole like this, and you just see solid. They put cameras up to see it. They're crossing several highways, 2 reservoirs that they're doing it. As the head biologist said, here's something that was happening right under our noses, and we had no idea. First example. Second one was a little bit more complex than that, putting the wolves back into Yellowstone. And a lot of legal action and things like that, but they wanted to put them back to keep the elk population down, have some control over that. It's a national park, it's big enough, it should be able to handle several wolf packs, which it can. And they put them back, and they kind of had a bit of an inkling, but not much. What they found is that the wolves had a profound impact on 2 species. The first species, which surprised them, was coyotes. First year alone, they knocked the coyote population down by 1/3. They're now down to half what they were. Second was elk, and elk, I believe, and don't quote me on the numbers, but I think it was something like 17,000, and they're about 8,000 now. So they did what they want. But what they did, the wolves completely changed the behavior of those 2 species. And that changing their behavior completely changed the ecology of the park area. Elk like to browse on willows and poplars, and what they found was that they're in the river bottoms and creek bottoms and eating them all, and they actually had no trees growing up since the 30s when the wolves were wiped out. It was only mature, and then the elk were coming in and eating everything that came up. So there was nothing in there. So what